RMBSs that were issued in 2005, 2006, 2007, which are now coming due, right? There's been a tremendous amount of debt that was piled on in the 2000s that have been coming off slowly. And what's happening is we've got much more rigorous lending standards today. And so, intuitively, it also makes sense to me that leverage overall in commercial real estate has come down from levels where it was before. Okay? And then equity, we've got, the other 50%, and the lion's share is private equity. Now, what's private equity? What's private equity? Irene, you work in private equity. What is private equity?
Private equity is capital that comes from private lenders, high net worth individual, family offices, institutions. They have a different horizon than the public equity in terms of investments, in terms of requirements and risk.
Okay, well, it can't come from private lenders. Okay, it can come from private individuals, but really it can come from you and I. So we could, at a very large scale, it's institutional, but at a very low scale, it's you and I. I bought a retail property. I bought a single family home. I bought a lot in Pinecrest, and so on, right? I got a whatever in Las Olas, right? So ultimately, it boils down to private equity or private equity investments as it relates to real estate is non-publicly traded ownership of real estate. Publicly traded ownership of real estate in this country is primarily held how? Through what vehicles? REITs. REITs, okay? Real estate investment trusts. And why are they held through real estate investment trusts? Because they are tax advantaged vehicles in which you can own real estate and distribute passive income. Okay, so there are what are called REOCs, real estate operating companies. I'll talk about one in a little bit, but we don't see a lot of publicly traded real estate owned. Most real estate is owned through REITs, entities that have elected REIT status, and the reason they've done that is because it's a tax advantage way to distribute the earnings back to the individuals. Now, how do I come up with these numbers? So, can you guys see that a little bit or no?
Most of the real estate private equity firms require invitation. For example, I got involved with the tech one, Kleiner Perkins, Coalfield Buyers. You need to be invited.
Okay, so let's talk about institutional real estate versus friends and family. At the end of the day, you and I don't matter, right? I mean, if you buy 100 shares in the stock market today or tomorrow, how many billions of shares trade on the New York Stock Exchange every day, right? Real estate, to some extent, is the same way. And ultimately, the large institutional owners are the ones that control the bulk, the lion's share of the commercial real estate in this country. There are a lot of reasons for that, and we'll explore some of that, okay, as we talk about different articles. If for no other reason, let's just stop and think about, risk and personal risk and concentration of risk, right? If I have $5 million and I put it all in one asset, I've got all my eggs in one basket, right? There's no diversification, right? But if you're managing, if you are, and I got the numbers right now, but if you're teachers and you've got $48 billion invested in real estate, you can buy a $40 million building, a $50 million building, lose it, and still make it up with whatever earnings you have in a whole bunch of other ones, okay? And so ultimately, institutional capital is the one that controls real estate in this country. Most institutional capital or private equity ultimately goes back to what he then mentioned. High net worth individuals, pension funds, family offices, sovereign wealth funds, etc., etc., etc. And those guys aren't going to deal with you and I. He then talked about something called horizon, right? So ultimately, one of the things we'll analyze in this class is what is the different behavior between equity that's real estate equity that's private versus public. There are benefits and detriments to each one, right? I don't want to jump to one of the slides we'll talk about later, but we talk about primary markets, we talk about secondary markets. So who read? When we talk about primary, what are primary markets?
The initial issue.
The initial issuance of equity or debt by a company, right? So ultimately, that primary issuance goes, the proceeds go in order to the benefits of the company. What is a secondary market?
Where they're trading
Buying and selling.
after.
So it is essentially the ability to have liquidity in which now the company no longer participates in the trading of those instruments, right? But the individuals are trading those, right? And so what public equity allows you to have is that liquidity. Well, in exchange for that, there's going to be different behavior associated with that and a different return profile, and we'll take a look at that.
Is that why equities are perpetual instruments as defined in the book?
Well,
Can you talk about it?
Why don't you hold that question
Okay.
for the afternoon, and we'll
Okay.
talk a little bit about the different features of equity
Okay,
versus
okay.
debt, okay? That's a good question. But when we talk about private equity, one of the problems that private equity has is it's a liquidity issue. It's a timing issue. Most funds that invest in real estate is a long life asset. And so what you can't do, especially in a commercial space, is flip assets. You know, you can't just buy a $40 million building, paint it, redo the kitchen and the bathrooms, and sell it tomorrow and make 30%. It doesn't work like that. Typically, there's a lot of work that goes into it, right? And so most real estate investment funds, for example, have lives of 10 years or 11 years or 10 years with extensions associated with it, because you don't know how the cycles are going to work, and you don't know ultimately when you're going to be able to liquidate assets. And so most individuals don't have that time of horizon or don't want to lock that money in for that long period of time. So Kleiner Perkins isn't going to take $100,000 from you, or even $1 million from you, or even $5 million from you. But if you're a pension fund that manages $4 billion, they'll take $400 million from you and do a separate account, or they'll commingle it with other people. Okay? Now, are there options for investing in real estate on a private basis without having institutional level money? And the answer is yes. But you got to know the right people, and you got to trust them. I know some guys. No, look, I know some guys. Their background is primarily in high-end home building, but they've dabbled in institutional real estate in the past. I say institutional. They've raised money in the past. They hired an acquisitions guy who was a good friend of mine, who I've actually brought some classes to speak in the past. And because of my relationship with him, I've invested in 2 of their funds. My old boss did a friends and family fund. I had to invest in it. I wish I would have invested more now, but I invested in it. So ultimately, yeah, there are options. I get junk emails from, there's a group out in California. I'll forward it to you guys if you're interested. There's a guy in California that's doing industrial space throughout the country. And so he's raised $200 million or something like that. He does it deal by deal. One of our former students does acquisitions for a group in Coral Gables that are retail guys. And they do troubled assets, and they turn them around. They do brokerage, property management. But they reposition all their assets, and it's all friends and family money. They need $50 million for center, they'll raise it. So the answer is, yeah, it's available, but you got to know people. Okay? Did I answer that question? Yeah. Yes, you did.
Just to add a little bit, and also the correct legal structure to do an SPV or special purpose vehicle to raise for friends and family and not get yourself into trouble. One of the things that has changed after the crisis is before you raise family and friends and you charge a fee as an asset management fee that we're going to see in Chapter 5, the asset management. However, now the Security Exchange Commission, after you raise and you said that you have assets under management, they want you to register as not as a broker-dealer, but an asset manager. And not in full compliance, but you have to have some compliance. So you have to be very careful how you choose your SPV to do investments. And if you decide to do portfolio or you're a developer. So.
Got a question.
Yes, Quincy.
The way she's explaining it, could you I don't wanna say skirt around that, but could you get around that by doing like a self-directed IRA and investing out of your self-directed versus registering as a broker and all that? So I pull funds from other guys' IRS to do deals. Then we got in trouble, and then they advised us to go the self-directed route, which is working good.
Okay.
That's chapter 5. though.
Yeah, well, no, but what I don't want to lose is, I don't want to lose thought of something Irene said that I want to bring up, and then I'll address briefly your point. The issue ultimately, there's a lot of different issues as to, are we public or private? I always bring current events, and I'm going to talk about public or private real estate from a different perspective. Now, there are a lot of different considerations as to whether we are going to trade our equity on a public market or whether we're just going to be private. There are a lot of different considerations. The easiest one is ultimately public. The liquidity that you are afforded by having equities trade or securities trade in the public markets requires a significant amount of reporting. And reporting ultimately translates to cost, right? So you hear companies that talk about public company costs can run in the range of $4 to $10 million for a relatively small company by audit fees, the corporate overhead that you need to have, internal audit departments, corporate in-house legal counsel, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so there's a lot of cost involved in it. The other one is the whole regulation and the whole issue of registration. Irene was talking about the registration of the sponsor. Well, we can also talk about the registration of the securities. So everything is a cost, right? So everything in life, there's a trade-off there. So I wanted to mention that. As related to your issue of self-directed IRAs, I don't like to give advice. I don't like to give advice, but I'll give you my perspective, okay? Retirement money is probably not best served for speculative real estate development activities. And when you advise people to do that, you're probably putting a risk profile with an investment that probably, and again, those are decisions people need to make individually, okay? Could you use a self-directed IRA to invest in real estate? The answer is yes. There's a lot of rules associated with that, and I don't know them all. I've looked them up in the past because that question's come up here. Because people see retirement money and they immediately see dollars and see an opportunity. But one thing is that you, on a personal level, for your investment decisions, opt to take your retirement dollars and invest them in a particular way. But let me put it from a different perspective. A lot of people have, for example, put all their eggs in one basket. I work for a big company. My whole retirement is in my own company stock. Companies go belly up, people lose their retirements. So, same sort of parallel with taking all your retirement money and putting it into what are potentially speculative, investment vehicles with potentially little liquidity, etc. So I'm not telling you not to do it. I'm just saying. So you've got a mechanism. You've found a mechanism to access capital. Might that be the best source of capital for a real estate investment? That's a question that has. I wouldn't do it. I wouldn't do it. But did I? Did I talk to that properly or not? I don't know.
Yeah, it's okay.
That's its perspective. It's a perspective. So the answer is, but can you do it? Yeah, you can do it. But I think we're also talking about different sort of scales.
Right.
Most people don't have $100 million in an IRA to invest in real estate. So ultimately, when we talk about private equity, the friends that I have that are doing this have raised 2 funds. They've got 90 some odd million bucks of equity raised, plus a couple of sidecar investors that have come in on deals. It's about 120 million bucks. Even on a private basis, there's a series of legal requirements and documentation that you need to follow. You need to make sure that investors are qualified, etc. So, to participate in okay, what's a commercial real estate asset worth? Tula, what's a commercial real estate asset worth?
Sky's the limit.
Right, but millions of dollars, right? So ultimately, if you gotta do diligence, it's gonna cost you the same $200,000 to do a $1 million retail center as to do a $40 million office building or a $75 million retail center. You know, you're gonna look at the soil, you're gonna look at title, so maybe a little bit more, but from a scale perspective, you're gonna spend the same, right? And so from an institutional or from a commercial perspective, you wanna talk bigger dollars, you need to have bigger investors in the bucket. If you're doing residential, smaller deals, yeah, maybe a retirement account is an appropriate source of capital or the appropriate dollars in capital. Yes, no.
Do you see policy change with the Jobs Act in terms of sourcing money? You familiar with the Jobs Act, which allows you to source money through other investors, kind of like a Kickstarter?
Okay. I don't know what act it's through, but what I was going to talk to is there is an evolution in all of these. There's a whole bunch of sort of crowdfunding initiatives. There are limited registration offerings or capital raisings permitted under some act. I don't know if it was booked under this Jobs Act. Do I see it? In the long run, no. In the long run, no, because what's going to happen is you're going to have people shortcutting. Right, I get emails every day from a guy in Miami that's he's done one of these limited registration offerings where he's raising $50 million to do to do residential mortgages. And Miami, a guy raising money to do mortgages, it's just a matter of time before we see it blow up. And when we get 3, 4, 5 of these things blowing up, somebody's going to say, where were the regulators? You know, why wasn't this regulated? Why wasn't this disclosed? So, and ultimately, I did take a look. So, there's two problems associated. You still come back to most individuals don't have the time horizon for private equity. And the problem is the liquidity. Look, part of my sabbatical that I'm on right now, which I may never get out of, I don't know. Part of my sabbatical at one point was trying to raise, we tried to raise a couple $100 million to do a private equity fund. And guys I was working with had a guy embedded in their office who ran 2 private family office money. One was a $3 billion family office from a Central American guy. The other one was a $600–700 million Venezuelan guy. And, sorry?
Did you deal it yet?
No, it's one of, no, but this guy his wife threw him out of the house, so he doesn't manage, it was his wife's money. So, but no, they're still it's a very prominent family in Venezuela to this day.
No, Cisneros Wade.
There was a very prominent family in Venezuela today, that's all I'll say. So we said, one of the guys, the guy had the Central American, so he had a $3 billion family office, and he was generating $200 million a year in dividends, and he had to put to work. So, supposedly, the owner said to him, I want to invest $200 million in real estate, do it over 2 or 3 million. I want to take like $50 million every year. So we talked to this guy, and ultimately, the answer we got from both of us after going through some extensive work and presentations was, even these guys at those levels, they wanted liquidity. So it's like, how do I get out? What do you mean, how do you get out? We're doing a fund for you. How do we get out? He goes, well, yeah, but what if in a year I want to liquidate my holdings? Real estate doesn't work that way, because the timing most likely isn't going to be there in a year. If you're looking for returns, and we'll talk about value and core, and we'll talk about styles of investing, ultimately, if you want return in today's environment, you've got to take some kind of risk in repositioning an asset. You got to get your hands dirty. So in a year, you're not going to be ready to sell. In 2 years, you're not going to be ready to sell. So even at that scale, people with significant, their big concern was liquidity, liquidity, liquidity. So the fact that the Jobs Act allows, there was a lot of hype given to it. You still have state blue sky laws, and you still have to deal with qualified investors. And so it seems like it's easier, but ultimately there's still a cost associated with raising the money. Now, these 3 students that I've been mentoring, they're taking a look at this. One of the guys, his wife is a securities attorney in Greenberg. So he thinks that there might be some opportunities there. He thinks
Did you say it, Newburgh?
at Greenberg Troy.
Greenberg. I thought you meant Newburgh, sorry.
No. He thinks there might be some opportunities to raise equity without the significant cost. I had a professor in graduate school that talked about the internet and how that was the big sort of change agent in the dissemination of information. We'll talk about markets and all that in a little bit this afternoon, but so I could be wrong. I think there's a move to that. I think there's a willingness to go to that. I just don't know. I don't want to say man is bad. I don't want to get to that conclusion. I don't want to give too many opinions here, but you get no choice. But I don't know if man is inherently bad or inherently good. That's for tomorrow morning when you're in church for somebody to tell you. Okay? And then whether to buy into, depending on the church you go to, you're going to get a different answer. Okay? I don't know if man is inherently good or inherently bad. But what I would tell you is that there is a reason why there was a Securities Act in 1933. There's a reason why there was a Securities Act in 1934. There was a reason why there's a Registered Investor Act, it's in 1940. And unfortunately, there's a reason why there's Sarbanes-Oxley. There's a reason why there's a Patriot Act. There is a reason why we continue to have regulation surrounding investments. And this course will deal with all of that. So there are a lot of sort of intuitive reasons that would tell you that the game will change, but I think there's some human behavior issues that ultimately, and I want to go back to, ultimately, regulation comes back when people get hurt, right? When there's a banking crisis, when people's deposits are at risk, when people's retirement gets blown up. Why was Enron an issue? Well, it was an issue for a lot of reasons, but because people lost money. A lot of people lost money. When people lose money, who do they look to? The government, right? I don't know why I remember this. I think it was like 1998 or whatever. There were some floods in Venezuela. I was going to go to Venezuela at Christmas time. There's some floods. The airport was flooded up. And in the news, people were saying, "Where's the government? Where's Hugo Chavez to rescue us or whatever?" I don't know why we always look for the government, because from my perspective, we need the government away from our lives, not in our lives. The more regulation we have, the worse off we are. But sometimes we do need the government to protect ourselves, protect us from ourselves. Let me close off this. I don't want to spend a lot of time, so I kind of came up with this 4 million, but my 4 million has an implication on what percentage of real estate is owner-occupied, which I really don't know. Okay, because owner-occupied real estate really doesn't play in this sort of, so I ultimately have to walk back to a 40% number, but it's probably closer to 60 or 70% in this. I'm sorry, in this country it's probably right, about 40% owner-occupied, so I'm probably about right. But anyway, where do I get my numbers? So I'll give you the easier ones. Where's public equity? Well, I went to my Schwab account, I downloaded all of the REITs that were out there, and I got their market cap, right? It's not that hard. You can do it. I did it. You guys can do it, right? If you want to know what, private debt is. Okay, Fred, not Fred Forgy, not Dr. Forgy, Fred. Fred is a site that's maintained by the Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis. Incredible source of information. There are 12 Federal Reserve branches in this country. Each one of them has a different sort of focus and specialty. The one in St. Louis gathers data. If you want data of any kind, go to the Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis. FRED is a website. FRE, do a search for FRED. Okay? Incredible information. So I want to know how much private debt there is. Real estate loans, commercial real estate loans from all commercial banks. You can get it. No problem. You want life company debt? No problem. Get the same thing from 1949 on. Mortgage debt outstanding by type of holders and property. Okay? We want to take a look at public debt. Not that difficult. There's mortgage REITs out there. So you sum mortgage REITs plus what else? What else is out there? There are commercial and residential-backed mortgages outstanding out there, right? Where do you get that? Well, you get it from FRED too, okay? So non-residential mortgage pools, okay? So I'm talking commercial space here, all right? So there's a wealth of information out there that we can access and ultimately can tell us, right? Can ultimately tell us where to get private equity. There's an organization called NACREIF. You're going to know NACREIF. NACREIF is a National Association of Commercial Real Estate Investment Fiduciaries. Okay? National Association. What did I just say? I just said it, right? Commercial Real Estate Investment Fiduciaries, okay? They track all the commercial properties owned by all the large institutions in this country. What's the value of December 34? December 2014, $400 million. You know, and so on and so on, okay? So you can kind of come back, and what I did with the quadrant was my public debt, so non-residential mortgage pools plus mortgage REITs, my equity, all the REITs that are outstanding, private debt, I got it from FRED, private equity, I got from NAREIT, and I backed into, so part of that is NAREIT, but ultimately, if I know the total value of real estate, right? So I knew it, so FRED only gave me until the beginning of 2014, I inflated it by 6%. I said that 40% of the real estate in this country is owner occupied. The other 60% is in the private and public domain. They gave me an enterprise value of $4 trillion. So sort of by default, because I get the other one's equity, my private equity was 1.5 trillion. But anyway, I could have errors in my math. There could be flaws in my math. But it's a way to get to a value. And it at least gives me a scale of how big real estate is. Maricela.
Why 6%?
Because FRED only had the value at 1/1/2014. So I just inflated the value 6% to get to December 31. Because when I did this at the beginning of the summer, they hadn't published the data for the end of 2014. That's why. Because if you come over here, this points back to total value of real estate, right? Okay, and the total value of real estate, I only had (1/1/2014). So, did the value of real estate grow 6%? I don't know, maybe it grew more. It's an assumption, we can change it, we make it 10%. Yes,
So
no?
that is only financed real estate, correct?
Well, when you say finance, I've got equity, and I got debt.
Right.
I mean, it could be financed or not. I'm not tracking, I mean, I don't know all the assets, right?
Right.
I don't know if Fred's right. Fred may be right, Fred may not be right, but it's indicative. And it's people that are gathering information, and there's a time series involved with it, okay? And there are things here that are telling me intuitively if other people are coming up with similar numbers with different methodology that, again, I don't know what the number is. It's a big number. It's a big number. It may be $5 trillion. And it looks like the trends have been that it's financed 50% with equity and 50% with debt. Maybe it's 55-45. But it's giving me a frame of reference of the space that I'm working in. Okay? Yes? Paul?
Well, I gotta make a comment before about your foreign investors you were talking about, and the example he gave that he wanted liquidity to get out of properties. Well, that's a principle of real estate being an inefficient market. It's not readily convertible to cash. Is that correct?
Well, I wouldn't say that it's inefficient, right? I wouldn't say that it's inefficient. And frankly, in the public markets, right? In the public markets, you can own shares in REIT, so you can ultimately own residual ownership interests in real estate and have that liquidity. But as you'll see during the course of the term, there are different behavior, there's different risk-reward profile or paradigm as it relates to that than in the private space. What you will find, I don't want to blow the punchline, what you'll find is you probably have a higher return and a lower risk profile with private equity than you do with public. Why is that? You're trading off something. In order to have liquidity, right? In order to have liquidity, you're going to be subject to different forces. But again, I don't want to say it's inefficient as much as that's one of the characteristics of the asset class, right?
Yeah.
If you own nuclear reactors, that's, you know, that might be a 20-year build, right? I mean, that's just an inherent, you know, process, right? Carol?
Yeah, I wanted to add to you saying that about liquidity. Everything can be sold pretty fast, especially with real estate. A fireside sale would do it. It's just a matter of you're going to lose a certain amount. You won't realize this much maybe it's your principal. You're going to lose. The cost of liquidating so fast.
Right, so
I was just being facetious.
So well, one of the articles, no, listen, it's a good point. One of the articles that, you know, we'll touch is, it's called buy-sell decisions. And, you know, it's just a sort of article to jog thinking. You're right today. In 2008, you were not right. And I can show you, I can demonstrate just on the commercial space, but we can talk about residential space because there was no lending, there was no debt available, right? And nobody knew what the real values were. We have another article on appraisals. What's the value in rapidly changing markets? If real estate drops 40%, right? So I had a conversation with somebody this week, preceded by another conversation a couple weeks earlier. A friend of mine wants to do an investment in a publicly traded home builder in Brazil. Yeah, Maricella's going. So the question is, it's the investment question. Can you catch a falling knife? Or do you get caught? Because the problem is when the markets are falling rapidly, do you know if you've hit bottom? And so the conversation, these guys that I, you know, this acquisition guy is a friend of mine. The two guys he works for had done a public self-storage business in Brazil, and it sold it. And I don't want to go back to Brazil and buy land and develop stuff because they think it's cheap. Well, I'm sure it's cheap, but is it the right value? And do you have the time horizon, and do you have the patience and the equity in order to buy it? So the answer is one could argue that there is, in this country, a fair amount of depth, right, and breadth in markets, and that most assets are readily marketable, and that is probably true most of the time, but it's not always true all of the time. And your point is definitely valid. At a price, real estate is always worth, you know, so, you know, at a 4 cap, maybe you don't buy it. At a 6 cap, maybe you don't buy it, but maybe at a 15 cap, you buy it, okay? And so, yes, there is always a value at which real estate will trade, okay? Done with this one? I did another one. I did another presentation. First time I taught this class, and I don't know if it's relevant or not, but I was like trying to get my hands around what's real estate. You know, like what's real estate? Because I thought I knew what real estate was, and I went back and I challenged myself, and I said, well, if I tried to quantify how big the value of real estate was, I tried to understand, well, then how much real estate is there, and how much can I develop, and how big can it go? Because I thought, well, we're in a big country, right? So I came upon a slide, and this was from a textbook that when I did my master's in finance, and this is census data. It's kind of curious. It said that the single largest component of land in this country is something called rangeland. I didn't even know what rangeland was. Well, I'll show you, because you got to learn. I have no idea what rangeland is. And the next one is forest land. And by the way, in one of the asset classes, or one of the articles that we have is timberland investments. Okay, so that's real estate too, although we don't really know a lot, especially in South Florida. We've cut everything down. We don't know what timberland is. Okay? And we got almost an equal number, right? 60% of land are federally owned lands, which in a lot of cases also have a series of real estate exploitation opportunities with them. Mining, agriculture, etc. 20% is cropland. I've got 80% of the land in this country is not developable just by right, just by default. Pasture land, that's like where the cows graze. Right? We don't have any farmers. I've had farmers in Clapperley, but I've had farmers in the program. You're a farmer?
Part-time.
All right, okay. Pasture land is where cattle graze and sheep and goats and all that, right? So 86%. Developed land is only 6% of the surface area in this country. Wow. And in other rural and then water areas, lakes, rivers and all that. I'm surprised, I don't know if this summary, what this includes is actual water surface area of lakes. That might be what that is, because land that is subject to restrictions for development because of water flows is probably a significantly bigger, at least in Florida. One would believe that it's a higher number. I didn't know what rangelands were, so I did. So rangelands are unforested lands, also known as prairies, grasslands, shrublands, savannas. But we have rangelands here in Florida too, by the way. So I went and did a map, and first of all, you see like half of this continent is rangelands. Half of this continent, all of this one for all practical purposes, probably all that, and most of Australia. Have you guys ever seen, there's like an aerial map of the world from like a satellite, like at night with the lights? Have you ever seen that? And it's like, you kind of tend to see in coastal areas. And there's a reason for that, right? You see Australia, there's like 3 little lights, and you can't develop, you can't live in most of these places, This stuff's kind of curious that we can't develop. Now, just jump from that. Asset classes. Look, this one is always changing. Asset classes are always changing. Some very traditional. There's some very traditional sort of. So when we talk about residential, right? You can play Tyler's company deals, delves in, doing land development, and then doing development within some of the sites, some of the planned unit developments that have. You can develop single family, you can develop multifamily for sale or for lease, right? You do timeshares. That's what we talked about that in the accounting class. We don't think about it here, but timeshare is a huge business in Central Florida, for example. It's a huge real estate business. A lot of times we focus on what we know in our local markets, but there's a whole bunch of stuff going on out there. We know the major commercial spaces, right? Whether you're doing land development, but ultimately doing office, industrial, retail, or hospitality, right? But then there's a whole bunch of other subclasses, and they're continually evolving. Probably 40 years ago, there were no self-storage facilities. Highest returning REE asset class over the last 10 years. I mean, it seems like the more we have, the more junk we just store. And I can tell you, I have my oldest friend in life, also took a sabbatical like 5 or 6 years ago. He bought one, then he ultimately bought 3 self-storage facilities. He's now sold all 3 of them. Because the prices were so crazy, he said, I'm going to sell now, and I'll get back in when this blows up again. Okay? I've got another friend who's talking about developing one up here in Cooper City. And he wants me in on it. Maybe we'll get you in on it. I don't know. But restaurant, retail, public places. Now, a lot of these things, a lot of times, aren't profitable or aren't for profit motives, right? They're institutional. Parking lots. I mean, there's huge money in parking lots, right? It's cash flow. At the end of the day, it's cash flow, right? Agricultural land, including, who's heard of the King Ranch? We used to have a guy that taught in the program that worked for the King Ranch, single largest property owner in the country.
Is that the guy in Texas?
He owns, yeah, but in Florida, and I'll show you now, he's one of the top 10 property owners in Florida. A lot of times, they'll buy land and then just lease it to somebody else. They're essentially a real estate investor. Yes, sir.
If it's the same guy who's selling 500,000 acres in Texas, which is bigger than New York and Florida.
Is it bigger than Lenox Hill?
Yeah.
Okay, no, it's
sorry. But the deal is $750 million, and they also want 10% of any mineral rights found on the land. Is that the same family?
I saw something, I don't know if it's the same family, I saw something the other day, and I don't think it was in Texas, I think it was further west. And I don't think the King Ranch are selling anything. So, but again, there's some huge land, to your point. You know, and I'll show you in a second, huge concentration in that. Talking about mines, it's an interesting thing, and I don't know anything about this. In a lot of states, and this is why law is important in real estate. In Florida, in most places, most deeds ultimately require mineral rights to revert to the state. And so in most countries in the world, and surprisingly in this country as well, mineral rights don't belong to you. What's underneath doesn't belong. Now, in a lot of cases, the state will vacate those rights. That's the case here in Florida, for instance. What do we mine in Florida? What do we mine in Florida?
Limestone.
Rock, basically. And what do we use that for?
Building, sub-base infrastructure.
So infrastructure, sub-base, all concrete, right? You know, cement. And typically that will be vacated. A significant industry in Dade County in particular, there's a lake belt, which is governed by state law. It really is outside the jurisdiction of the county. And I guess Cemex now is the one that controls the bulk of it, but you know, Florida Rock and White Rock Industries control, you know, that area, and they make their living taking land out, right? Things you never think about, cemeteries. There's 2 publicly traded companies that are cemetery. I mean, it's kind of a sick business, you know, kind of morbid, right? But it's a cash flow business. You buy land, people, and we all die. You buy land and you put stuff in it. There's landfills. There are people that take land and fill it with junk. There are people that take lakes. If you come up 595, when I started teaching in this program, you drive on 595 from the turnpike west to get off on Davie Boulevard, and there was a guy filling a lake with junk. So somebody had excavated it for fill, and another guy came back and filled it with junk, and now there's townhouses on it. That's what you do, right? So, but there's all kinds of businesses that are evolving now. If you think of real estate now, there are REITs now that are doing funky stuff. There's a couple of REITs that own the land under railroads, and they just generate lease income. There are, what was a big deal announced yesterday? American Tower buying 40% of a cell tower operator in India. People that operate cell towers, right? There are people that operate data centers. I mean, there's all kinds of, you know, we don't see any publicly traded ones with people that operate shared office spaces. I mean, there's all kinds of businesses out there. You know, I don't know if I'm right or not. You know, people talk about the oldest profession in the world, right? Well, the second oldest profession in the world has to be real estate, because in order to do the first, you know, you needed a venue. Everything you do has to be in real estate. And so it's a really old business, and it's an evolving business. And as businesses evolve, I'm sorry, maybe that was, can you delete that? Aren't you? I can't delete it.
It's all final.
Oh my God. And so, but you know, as businesses evolve, you stop to think. One of the articles, and what I want, again, in this class, what I want you to do is think, because ultimately, the guy who's going to make the money is not the guy that's doing what everybody else is doing. It's the guy that's thinking what people are going to be doing somewhere down the line, right? So, how many people is Amazon going to hire now in the fall? Somebody see that the other day? They hired 100,000 temporary workers for the Christmas season. Amazon announced earnings yesterday. What were Amazon's sales for the last quarter? Does anybody know? $25 billion for the last quarter. So that's kind of a run rate of $100 billion worth of sales.
They can't turn a profit, and they had
Well,
too much in Alibaba.
Okay, so, but I'm not talking about investing in Amazon. But by the way, I've been wrong on that one, because people keep buying that. But my point is that's $100 billion of sales that have come out of retail centers. And if we don't think there's an impact, you remember a company called Borders? Okay? There's things happening out there, okay? And ultimately, how does that impact real estate? Well, I don't know, maybe, you know, you'll see later on that retail's been a very profitable asset class with low volatility in real estate over the years, but is that going to continue to be the case? And stop to think, the guy that in Lakeland owned the land that sold the distribution center to Amazon probably made a lot of money. As opposed to the guy that owned the retail center that had the Borders. Or the Staples that got closed, and now he's got like, you know, the church of whatever. Yes, no.
They said they're gonna stop selling Apple and Google products as well. Amazon announced that to kill off the competition. And then if you have Prime, it's like 2 cents cheaper than everyone else. It's kind of antitrusty.
You know, I'm not an attorney. I'm not an attorney, but I'm sure there are people looking into this, okay? People are looking, and ultimately, if there is unfair competition, somebody's going to uncover it along the way. I don't want to talk to the business model of Amazon making sense from a financial perspective as an investor in Amazon, because your question is right. You sell $100 billion a year and you make $2 million. It doesn't, or you know, whatever, 20 million. It makes no sense. But the fact that it's driving traffic away from the traditional mechanism, that's true. There's no arguing that, okay? And when we talk about that, how many other business models have been impacted by technology? When I started working and you wanted to take a business trip, you went to a corporate travel agent. Who's dealt with a travel agent? When I got out of college and I wanted to buy stock, you had to have a broker. You needed to know a broker, you know? You needed, what was that guy? No, it wasn't Schwab. The guy so-and-so says, and then everybody would go like, it'll come to me in a second. E.F. Hutton says, and everybody go, you know? If you didn't have a broker, you couldn't buy stock. Who trades with a broker?
I did. When I was younger.
You were younger, you're like 23, dude. What are you talking
When I was like 12, we got to use a broker.
When
Use a broker or something.
I was 12, what are you, a trust fund baby?
I've owned for 13 years.
I'm just kidding.
We had to go in and use a broker. It was nothing like,
Yeah.
and then they pay him a ridiculous amount of money for a trade. And
But there's been disruption. Look, hey, I'll give you another one. I'll come to you in a second. There's been another one which impacts Florida in particular, right? Which is gambling. And so if you wanted to gamble in Florida, you went to the horses, or you went to the High Lie, or you went to the dogs, right? Yeah. Sorry.
Cruise ship.
Well, you go to the cruise ships, but now in Florida, in ground, you go to the track, right? Now, I like the horses. I'm not like a big gambler or whatever, but I mean, there's times I like to go in January, February, March to Gulfstream. That's when the best horses are here, right? It's a nice day at the track. I go with my dad. A lot of times I just pull out my phone and put it on TV and bet. And it used to be that simulcasting was a small sliver of gambling revenues. It's huge now. It's broadcasted throughout the world, right? Throughout the world, not through the country. The people gamble. And so there's been huge disruptions with technology, and ultimately it impacts venues. Because you say, well, okay, so what do I care? Well, if you're Magna International and you own Gulfstream, what the heck do you do there? They wound up building some shops because people weren't going to the track. And I don't know, the shops are doing well. I had, hold on, Chad, Stephen had a question.
Yeah, touching on the technology subject. I read this article a couple years back. I haven't seen any recent news on this, but how technology is impacting brick and mortar banking. Everything's done online. I don't remember the last time I was in a bank actually.
Well, so I mean that's a whole other industry that's been disrupted. And again, look, I'm not an economist, right? But the whole concept of money, like what is money, really has to do with technology. Because at the end of the day, right? Is this money?
Pretty much.
yes.
Right? But is this money?
Yes, big time.
And is this money?
Yes.
Because now this is money.
Yeah.
3 years ago this wasn't money in this country, but now it's money, right? So, I mean, technology is disrupting everything, right? So, and there's a lot more to come. And ultimately what you need to think, so that's great to talk about that, but how does it relate to real estate? How does it relate to what I want to do, right? So I mean, one thing, you could always go down Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? You could say, well, you need a place to live, so probably, you're probably pretty good up here, right? Maybe you need to eat, right? You know, you're probably pretty good here, you know? Maybe, you know, when you travel, but you start questioning other things. I'll give you another one. One of the challenges I'm gonna have to whoever has the Office article is, and what's happening with, so you're a law firm, 30 years ago, what do you have? A huge library. What's a library now? School where I work has no library. Everything's digital now, right? So from a status perspective, every partner had to have a corner office with, you know, whatever, 400 square feet, you know, 2 secretaries, you know, had to do their appointments, and they would come in and, you guys remember stenography? I mean, I remember that as a kid, you know, you call a secretary in and she, you know.
Transcription,
Yeah,
dictation.
and all that stuff, yeah. I mean, that's all gone. And so the question that I have is, how does that impact the office space? What's the average size of an office in this country today versus what it was 30 years ago, right? How much common space? Now people hotel. Now people do telecommuting or teleworking, right? So if you're a downtown law firm and you had 100 attorneys, maybe you had 25,000 square feet. Maybe you only need 5,000. Maybe you don't even need anything. You just have a portal on the internet and people call you. And you do free
conference call.
call hd.com and you just have like a picture behind you and it, you know, like looks like there's a lot of people in your office.
Matter of fact, to that point, education is changing. Brick and mortar classrooms.
Absolutely. I mean, and that's been evolving and will continue to evolve. And I'm going to say I'm ambivalent at best about that, because the pressure that we have, nobody says it, is going back to, you know, can we do remote teaching? Can we do all online classes? Can the university, for the same cost, deliver the product to 100 students? And that's where you get into the question of, well, how much education is interactive, right? And how much of it is just, you know, reading or visual, right? And, you know, we all have different perspectives on that. I deal every day with the iPad generation. There's no books at our school. There's no paper. It's all iPads. And I've seen this floating around the last few days. There's a St. Peter in heaven, and he's talking to like one of the angels, and he says, how are things going here? And he goes, I don't know, he goes, the latest ones we have look really unhappy and keep looking at their hands. And you see all these people that are like looking for their iPhones, you know? So it's like, things are changing, but we're dummying up stuff with some of that as well. So I had Chad and then you. Yes, Chad.
We talked about the Airbnb and impacts on the hospitality.
Yep, it's another one.
But the other thing is that it's not just the hospitality. There's like a new Airbnb for office space. So renting out office space, and then the same thing can be done
boat
for
rentals,
residential, right?
Yeah,
you don't have to do a year-long lease. You can do, you know, whatever type of months, and it gives you a menu of options. And people are always going to choose the options that they want. You know, and so it is going to bleed over into the other
So I mean, there's a lot of disruption, but the thing is, at least, I mean, the progression of technology. I remember the oldest one of my grandmothers, and she's been dead now for some time. She was born in 1899, and I remember, you know, sometime in the 80s talking to her, just saying, can you imagine, like, you know, what's happened since you were born? You know, public lighting, radio, television, cars, airplanes. You know, just keep going to forget. She never really lived the explosion of the internet. You know, I started working, there were no telefaxes. Forget internet. You know? So I was working in Spain, we'd communicate with our offices here with telex. You guys know what telex is?
Yeah, no.
So there was a big machine. Right, so Western Union was sort of a public telex operator, right? But big companies would have these telex machines, so there was like some lady that would, and like this long paper would come out, like on the other side of the world somewhere, you know? And, you know, stuff like that, you know, no emails, you know, I mean, there's no chatting, no Instagram, no Snapchat. Imagine that. How can you live?
You do your exam with no calculator, your CPA exam.
Exactly, absolutely, absolutely. Chad, oh no, you said Irene. Irene, we'll move on, guys. Irene, we'll move on.
My husband works in telecommunications, and his team created MPEG
Okay.
in early 90s, which is a protocol for YouTube video and for you to use video. And his office was actually in Atlanta, but he was in Miami. And if you enter to his office was not bigger than this, and probably like this. It was just one chair and a screen TV, and him sitting in Miami. And he has outside a bel tamaño, but
And
serious grace.
And the implication of all of that is, the ultimate says, so why is that important? And what's important is because if I were 25, if I just graduated from FSU in real estate and wanted to make a career in this industry, I think, where's the world going to be in 30 years, and what should I focus on? I went back, I mentioned I was in the graphic arts industry, and I was struggling with what I was seeing. And where we were taking our business was to the service side. So we were doing distribution, we were doing telemarketing, we were doing data analysis, we were doing design, we were doing photography. We were doing a lot of the front end work because the actual manufacturing seemed to be going away to the point where, a lot of you guys probably got books that came from India or, China or whatever, even to the extent that there is manufacturing. In that industry, there was on-demand printing, that you could just sit down and put your own book together. But things were happening, right? And I was afraid to make a move because that was a business I knew since I was a kid. Ultimately, was forced out of it, and I'm glad I was. But there's things happening all the time around you, right? I always use the example. In The Economist many years ago, I remember reading an editorial that said something about, it was talking about the Fortune 500 company, and at the time it was talking about General Motors was the company with the largest market cap in the world. And what it said, even General Motors does not have a sales book that goes out more than 3 or 4 weeks. Stop to think about that. The largest company in the world could not really tell you what their sales are going to be 2 months from now. And that's the case for most companies. And you saw what happened in 2008. Right? All of a sudden, like the black swan event. There's no black swans, but we saw one, right? Things can happen, right? Things 2 or 3 standard deviations out can happen, even though we don't think they're going to happen. They really do. But things are always changing in our world, and we need to be sensitive to that. And we need to be, back to that. I thought the article went on to say that, again, this is 20 years ago, something like 200 of the Fortune 500 companies, people don't know about Fortune 500 anymore either. Let's say the S&P 500 companies from 50 years ago don't even exist today. And the example that I always use of transformation was, there's a company called Smith & Corona. Who knows Smith & Corona? What did they make? Typewriters. Okay. IBM also made, the 2 biggest players in the industry were IBM and Smith & Corona. So IBM spun off their typewriter division in the early 80s. And what's that company called today? It still exists today. What's it called? It's called Lexmark. Lexmark realized that typewriters are nothing but keyboards and printers. And that's what they focused on, right? Does Smith & Corona still exist? Lexmark still does. Now, maybe they're not a big player anymore. Maybe they've missed their boat. But they evolved as a business to the point where they're still in business. And that's what we need to continually, change and evolve and see the trends that are happening in society, the trends that are happening in the capital markets, the trends that are happening in manufacturing, the trends that are happening in population, right? So that we know what we're going to market to, what we're going to target, et cetera. Okay? So, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it. I just wanted to show you this. This is from Florida Trend. That's another magazine. It's a phenomenal. It costs $12 a year. It's a great magazine for anybody who wants to do business in Florida. Florida Trend. This is the top 10 property owners in the state. Now this is like from 3 years ago, so that's changed a little bit. These are the Mormons, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. They just announced this week they want to build, I don't know how many hundreds of thousands of acres just east of Orlando. But anyway, the top 10 property owners in the state control, so yeah, I just kind of did.
Well, I think I found an article a while back, but from the Gainesville up to like Tallahassee, like one person owns all of that, and Procter & Gamble once held it, and then they're about to release it for about $1 million.
That's one, well.
Sorry, a billion.
Yeah, yeah, because Procter & Gamble had timberlands there, there's a lot of softwoods here.
It's still a timberlands too. It generates like, I think it said like 30 or 40 million just in timber every year, and it's just been sitting there.
The reason, but go back, the reason Procter & Gamble own it is there's a lot of soft timberlands up here in the Panhandle, and that's good for pulp, and Procter & Gamble owned it for their diapers, so to source their diapers. So there's trends in companies where they sort of vertically integrate, and there's trends when they horizontally integrate, and then there's times where they become conglomerates, you know, and all sorts of different businesses, and then they sort of get back to their focus. And then so that's just sort of different thinking. So that's one. The other big holding here was St. Joe / Florida East Coast, a company I worked for. A lot of this stuff's not been sort of, you know, sold off, but there's roughly 40 million acres in the state. About 3 million are the Everglades and the big cypress swamp. So 30 some odd million acres, and these 10 companies / people control 10% of that. You know, amazing. And you know, but again, why do I show you this? For no other reason other than you got to understand the environment, the market that you're in. Who's in it, and what do they do, right? And what's it for? And all of these have some sort of business associated with it. Plum Creek Timberlands, right? St. Joe. Originally, it was for paper and the mills that they had on it. Became a real estate developer, and that's all sort of, you know, sort of changed. Foley Timber, Rayonier. Rayonier is a REE, and what do? It's timberlands as well, okay? They do wood products, okay? Lights Brothers, farming, right? Desert Ranches of Florida, that's a developer. Is that? No, Mosaic is a developer. No, Mosaic is, what's Mosaic? Phosphate mining. So that's phosphate mining all east of, that's State Road 60, cutting across the state, okay? The Desert Ranches is farming. That's the Mormons, and they've extended, you know, that particular one. This was Timberlands. Florida Crystals is what? Sugar. Stop think of what are the businesses in Florida, right? And U.S. Sugar. So this is sugar, right? So ultimately, there's a lot of uses that we don't even see here in the 3 markets, the 3 metros that we live in South Florida. Agricultural, timber, mining. We don't really see a lot of that, right? The reason I'll show you the next map is just to see in Florida, there are basically 3 metros. Okay? So there's really 3 metros down here. Dade County, Broward County, and Palm Beach County, but it's one sort of like giant metro, right? There's Orlando, and there's Tampa. There's nothing else. From a real estate perspective, there's nothing else.
Not even Jacksonville?
Yeah, with all due listen, our corporate headquarters were in St. Augustine, then we moved them to Jacksonville, then we moved them down here. But I think even the Economic Development Agency in Jacksonville says that they're the last place to go before you go to India. It's like the last place before you go offshore. The answer to your question is yes, Jacksonville is really the 4th important metro. It's a tough market because there's a lot of land. When there's a lot of land, there's a lot of competition. But it is in fact an important metro, but there's nothing else. And why is that important? Why is, because Jacksonville will be owned by institutional investors, but why is it important that you're in a major market? That's because institutional real estate will not go to a secondary or tertiary market. Why not? Because there's no liquidity. So if you own the best office building in Sarasota, it may be the best office building in Sarasota, but who's going to buy it? No institution is going to buy it. Why? Because they're not going to be able to sell it. Because the first question you need to ask when you buy something is, how am I going to sell it? How am I going to sell it? Okay? How am I going to sell it? And some people, oh, how do I finance it? Oh, do I like it? Do I like the color? Is it pretty? No. How am I going to sell it? Okay? How do I get out? I know I'm getting in. How do I get out? Any business decision. Okay? So, again, I just, with scattered thoughts from a cluttered mind or whatever, right? Why don't we take like a 10-minute break? Is that good? Yeah. Take a 10-minute break. Yes, sir.
Sears and like most of their, Sears, how most of their properties work on their actual business.
We talked about some of that,
I've seen that more of a trend where businesses are going to be shifting their, say that the retailers are going to be losing market share almost where the businesses failing, but the real estate's worth so much.
There's definitely a shareholder portion. So Sears, you've seen they've gone off part of the real estate story. There's some pressure on McDonald's to do some of that.
Publix, they own most of the real estate for their pension.
Yeah, but Publix is also not publicly traded.
Yeah.
And so you're not gonna get that pressure. So it's the public companies that are probably gonna get more pressure. The answer is, there's always going to be pressure for that. There's always somebody that's gonna come in and say, how do I unlock value?
Yeah.
And if they see an easy, a low-hanging fruit, and real estate can be a low-hanging fruit with big dollars, that's where they're gonna go. So, Carol.
When you took the money out, currency out,
Yes.
This morning.
I was thinking to myself, going back to our there's currency, there's a money that's there, but there's currency and there's equivalent.
Right. Well, no, you're right. And listen, that, by the way, that could be a whole sort of term people in an institution, financial institution, because defining money is very different. And money is an whole, right? And so we can call it currency, we can call it whatever, but it's money supply.
Wait, is that?
At the end of the day, it's money supply. But this is just as money. The moneyness of this is no, this is not currency. It's not currency, but it's money.
You said you haven't been back?
Yeah.
It's changed so much.
Yeah, but he was there in what?
Well, no, I'm saying, but the strip was still the strip. The strip was still the strip. But even then, the strip was there forever.
I was there in '96. Like Bowman?
Yeah, I mean, that whole area has not changed since it started, but by the old IM fields, all those warehouses, they knocked that down and put like a mini mall,
like a college town.
college station over there. They wanted to shift everyone from the strip out to these new areas.
Yeah, they developed it on our part.
We'll talk about that in a second.
And then they have new IM fields that are like far from campus.
The new stadium was, it was the old bleachers. They just started building it.
They took the soccer fields next to Dope and made it a giant practice facility.
Yeah.
They still have the soccer field though.
Yeah, but they have new IM fields about like 5 minutes from campus. They're nice though. They're much better.
Well, because they say this is about 7 hours.
Yeah, our buddy, you have to fly if it's a weekend. You're really driving because you're only there 24 hours.
On top of it, I had originally started FSU.
Neither did I. That's part of the Florida Gulf Coast. They transferred up.
I started in Gainesville.
A little rough.
Yeah.
That's Thursday. Actually, I may have it here. It's online.
It's 69.
I thought it was like Murray Hill. Wait, I was getting it.
Murray Hill is south of Midtown.
Yeah. Hi, Brent. Second floor. Because we were like.
Different now, I'll enjoy this.
Yeah, I realized like when I graduated from New York, because I interned there, not in New York, I'm gonna pay $5 million for a studio apartment, like I'm gonna do it. Now, like I'm living in City Place in Long Beach, I'm like, here's my city.
Are you traveling?
Yeah, yeah, so now I'm like, I'm in my little city, like I actually lost downtown. There's like a little shop that I can take sometimes, like it's close enough. And then we were up there like, freezing my ass off.
You wanted me to do this course.
So what do you mean they're too long?
Because I just joined.
I'll let you know if I have the time to do it, because that's, it always comes down to me.
This class is off.
Yeah.
The beginning. So what you just did.
Oh, what I did,
it
okay,
starts-
yeah.
Oh wait, no, it starts in the winter.
Yeah, like the one, yeah, I'm taking things with there.
I'm trying to get this done in a year. I was just gonna start today. And you know what I do have to do is like,
Yeah. Is he like just?
okay. I went up there to help sell houses. I bought a house.
Yeah.
I mean, it's
But I was
like
just
that.
back up there.
Yeah, like I thought my summer out, like that's what me and my mom were talking about. I gotta have my stuff, you know what I mean? Like, I just stay and try to get traded for the same where yes, I'm doing with my and it's kind of
Like turnips.
I got, you know, like I got to face.
No, I can. All day.
So what's the one you can do? Other countries. It's like an event. I have a video on my phone. I'll show you. When I was up my year, I mean, you can see so much. I take videos. It's like, it is fun.
What's the end score?
I can cuss out. Literally.
Yeah.
All the time. Like, it's 500, like, I'm from university.
What's the end goal? Because right now you already have a restaurant, it sounds like you don't know yet.
Yeah, it was like
Why you're in the
Can't do that now.
You're just merging. Put it up for sale. The reality though is that how much you sell for.
I feel bad, someone would have brought it in.
And the creativity
So I would love to, especially
But if you don't do that to the kids,
there's a development basically lobby and I'm very comfortable with this lobby.
I went to high school.
I was working with different structure of government, state, local, federal. A lot of the army, different kind of assets.
Is this the graduate high school? I haven't seen him in a while.
I love some of the other things that they're talking about.
Yeah, okay.
I mean, that's all I.
Which you want to project? Want a project?
I'll find out where I've talked to here.
Want a project?
Whenever I visit the fall,
I said 10 minutes and we're at 12, so. Okay, so just to sort of, just to finish the introduction to the class. We've gone through the quadrant, right? We talked about capital stack. We talked about the fact that this class is going to deal with the capital side of the balance sheet. We'll talk about debt. We'll talk about equity. We'll talk about the instruments that are associated. We'll talk about the sources of the instruments. We further broke that down into a quadrant, right? Not just a two-box, but a quadrant of the public and the private realm, right? But I'm going to introduce a series of other concepts as well, okay? You know, and I think some of you, especially those that are closer to, you know, kicking dirt or being developers, you might have a little bit of difficulty with what I'm going to say. But at the end of the day, real estate, who knows where REITs are classified as an industry group? How are REITs classified as an industry? If you go and do a search of stocks, how are REITs classified? Financial institutions, financial services. Kind of strange, isn't it? I'm curious, home builders, which are developers, are under consumer durable goods, so you know it better be durable, right? But it's financial, and the reason I'm going to say that is because regardless of what any developer could tell you, regardless of what any construction firm can tell you, real estate has nothing to do with bricks and mortar. Real estate has nothing to do with how pretty a building is. I remember there's a developer in South Florida, I'm not going to mention his name. He walked out on a $600 million loan to Bank of America some years back during the crisis. This guy's back in vogue now. Not one of my favorites, but he's back in vogue now. He was in vogue, then he fell out of favor, now he's back and
That's
kicking.
my neighbor.
Okay, okay. And where do you live? Hogan and Grove?
Brickell. Well, his office is in
Okay, okay, all right. So anyway, he loses an asset, and he owes Bank of America $600 million. And in an article that I read in the Wall Street Journal, he says, well, you know, at the end of the day, nobody can take away the fact that I'm the one who built it. It was my baby, it was my vision. Dude, you just walked out on $600 million worth of debt. At the end of the day, real estate is nothing but a financial asset. It is nothing but the cash flow that it produces. And if you don't believe that, I can point 2-3 years ago, there were two big REITs, UDR and Avalon Bay, swapped $300 million worth of assets. They just basically said, hey, you know, as a company, you know, we're better suited to manage assets here, and we're not so good here, and you guys, they just swapped assets. They didn't care what colors the bathrooms were. They didn't care how many bedrooms there were. They didn't care the color. All they cared about was the cash flow that it generated. And if there's a focus that I want to take in this class is, while I really don't want to steal the thunder from the development side of the business, is to understand that real estate, at the end of the day, is a financial asset. And a financial asset, and you're going to hear this over and over again, a financial asset is worth nothing more and nothing less than the net present value of its future cash flows. That's what real estate is. So real estate isn't about, you know, one of the things, and I apologize to all those that are interested and follow and work in the residential side of the business. I stay away from residential in my classes. Because whilst residential real estate is real estate, in fact it is real estate, residential for the most part does not conform to all of the metrics that commercial real estate, you know, corresponds to. Primarily because it falls under Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? So, I need air, I need water, I need food, I need shelter, right? And then I need clothing, I guess, or maybe depending where you are, maybe you need clothing before you need shelter, right?
So you said that it has to do with net present value, but what about people who are buying these $100 million condos or just parking money instead of looking at net present values, because they don't care about cap rates, they don't care about anything other than they just need places to.
Okay, well, there's two different things there. To the extent that, and this is where I was going to finish, to the extent that we're talking about residential real estate, not only does it conform, right, to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, there's a huge subjective component and emotional component to the buy-sell decisions, right? So, oh, I don't like the kitchen. We're not, we're not buying, the bathroom's not big enough. Okay, that has nothing to do with value at the end of the day. But it's a very emotional and a very real decision that impacts buy-sell decisions, right? So residential doesn't really conform to the metrics of commercial. Now, you're talking about another article which has to do with flood capital. Unfortunately, to a large extent, it may even have to do with, call it what it is, money laundering, right? There was an article, I'm going to say it was in the Miami Herald this week, about money laundering within PDVSA. I think it was in the Wall Street Journal. PDVSA is a state-owned oil company in Venezuela. But they were talking about not hundreds of millions, billions of dollars that were being, and it's all money that comes out. So, and all illicitly, right? Now, the problem is, and that's why the Patriot Act comes into play here, right? And the reason this is all being uncovered now is because a bank blew up in Andorra. Who knows where Andorra is? Africa. No. Try door number 2.
Europe.
Right, so it's in the Pyrenees. It's a little principality that sits in the mountains between Spain and France. And now it's like a proper government, but it's had really bizarre governance. It had the archbishop of a little town next to it called La Seu d'Urgell was actually the head of state up until about 20 years ago. And then the president of France and the prime minister, or the king of Spain, shared oversight responsibilities. But it's a money center, and it's one of these like sort of bizarre banking environments. But it seems like all these billions of dollars are being funneled through banks there. A bank there blew up. It was intervened. It blew up, and now they've asked the U.S. government to investigate the transaction. So now under the Patriot Act, they're tracking down all these transactions. So ultimately, that money goes through those banks, right? But then it came back to real estate in Miami and in New York and all these other places. Okay. And what happens is it's all kinds of different transactions, and people don't care. I remember under a totally different scheme in a different time, talking about Peru. 1982 was one of the countries that blew up, but one of the schemes that was uncovered, fraudulent schemes, was the minister of whatever, fisheries or whatever, they got a $200 million loan for something, right? So they wound up buying 2 ships. But when they tracked or unbundled, peeled the onion on like the 8 transactions, fraudulent transactions that they did, there were like $4 million boats that wound up costing the government $200 million. And all along the way, there were shell companies that were taking commissions and funneling proceeds, and all that money was just coming back and being reinvested somewhere else, okay? And so when we talk about people using real estate to either illicitly, launder money, right, or sanitize money, or, formalize money, then there's also a licit one, which is, if you're a legitimate businessman in some countries that have currency exposure, have political risk, you may seek to find an investment that is not going to give you a return, but at least is going to preserve capital. Okay, so, maybe that's why somebody buys a $5 million condo, right? I get this rag on Saturdays, which I hate this newspaper. My mom and my dad used to get this at home. It's El Diario Las Américas. So it's like the newspaper with tomorrow's date and yesterday's news. But you have to have grown up in Miami. Like old Cuban people used to get this paper, right? So I get it delivered Saturdays. I don't pay for this. So when I travel, I can't cut the subscription, I come back and it's in my front door. By the way, this was a $600 million project that I was talking about. But anyways, it's downtown Miami. You know, every time it's you know, further away from the local pocket, right? Affordability. And it talks about this particular, you know, issue of the fact that people come in, they're cash buyers, and their motivation has nothing to do with anything other than parking money in a safe economy. All right? And so, you know, and that's it's a recurring topic that I bring up all the time, which is affordability, right? This whole article deals more with affordability or workforce housing or the ability to be able to provide for the people that work, to provide the services that we take advantage of, right? So I had an interesting, a friend of mine called me this week. His daughter came to our school, and she liked it, she wants to come, so he wanted to know what's going on. And I hadn't talked to him in a few months. I knew he works for the county, but he was at the airport. So I said, Iggy, what's going on? He says, no, because I moved over, I'm the deputy director of the Dade County Housing Authority now. And so I spent a bit of time, but I want to go see him now, because what their whole mission is providing affordable housing. And the whole issue is how do you, in an environment where the median income is $50,000, provide housing for people where the median sales price is $300,000? Or the median rent is $2,000 a month. Where do you get it from? Right? So anyway, that's a whole other issue altogether. But anyway, that's why I try to stay away from residential, because there are factors that impact it that really don't impact commercial. And I will tell you, while you may sporadically see a commercial transaction where you've got the same motivation, you rarely will see somebody making a commercial investment that doesn't have an underlying economic justification. You can question the return expectation. We'll get to this whole financial modeling in a second. I've got 4 questions, but we'll get to the underlying calculations. And there may be differences of perspective on expectations and cost of capital considerations, but by and large, people that are going to invest in commercial real estate are going to do so based on certain economic principles. Just so I don't forget, you, and you.
I was gonna say, I see it when I do commercial real estate. It's all off the books. I represent 4 Saudi families. Sharia law doesn't allow them to make interest or collect interest on their money. So they expatriate it over here, purchase commercial buildings, and then they have an asset, and then they pump it through leasing through other venues.
Yeah, it's interesting, and one of my sisters has lived in the Middle East on 3 different occasions, and it's an interesting environment. But there's a whole sort of evolving trend as well in Sharia banking, and so you can't pay interest, but you can share in the profits. And so you now have these Sharia compliant bonds where you're paying interest, but it's not called interest. It looks like it, so it feels like it smells like a duck, it quacks like a duck. It's a duck, but you can call it something else, you know. So, but definitely, Claudius.
Yeah, my question was the comment you made about residential. I was wondering, how would you rationalize a mixed-use development with a large residential component? Like, say, right downtown Brickell now, we have the Swire project.
So, well, okay, I don't know a lot about, that's the city center. I don't know much about the specific project. I do know Swire is a very old line, well-established foreign capital company. It's a Hong Kong-based company. They've been in development for well over 100 years, and they have interest in a series of other financial. So it's a large conglomerate. The family owns a huge stake in Cathay Pacific, etc. Their business investments have always taken a very long view. They, for example, purchased what was called Clutton Island, which people now refer to as Brickell Key, back in the 70s. They started developing, they did a joint venture with a guy named Charlie Cheesem. It's Brickell Key 1. I know that was my first place where I lived, but the thing blew up. They didn't care because they had very patient money, and their perspective was, we own it, and we'll develop it when it's right. And sure enough, it took 20 years, but they totally developed it. I don't know what component of their development is for sale and how much is for rent. I can tell you though, that, you know, they are speculative developers. They've got the capital to do it, but there's a huge component of that which plays into a long-term strategy of income generation. Because the retail and office components are going to have residual incomes associated with it. So notice from that mixed-use perspective, they are selling, but they're also generating income in the long term. And so, I mean, there's definitely a place. I didn't mention in the bottom, mixed use is anything. You're starting to see that in a lot of places, there's two forces playing into that. There is a regulatory component to mixed use, which is authorities saying, if you don't provide the services locally so that people don't have to put trips out on the road, we're not going to authorize the development. Or said a different way, they're going to say, okay, you want to put houses here? Okay, you need to provide the services for them here. So you have to provide some retail. And you can provide some office spaces so people can work. And so there's a regulatory component, but then there's also a practical economic component, which is how much office can a particular development or area take, right? So if you look at, I don't know the size of the office component at City Center, but it's something like 600,000 or 700,000 square feet, something like that. I don't remember off the top of my head the size of the Brickell submarket, but it's something like 10 million square feet. If on a market of 10 million square feet, you dump 600,000 square feet overnight, what do you think that's going to do to rents? What do you think happened the last time that 600,000 square feet were dumped on Brickell? When the building, the forum building was dumped, rents plummeted. Because there's no demand for 600,000 square feet, so what do people do? There's more supply. What happens? This is a supply and demand business, right? And so, while they may have had the development rights to build 3 million square feet under this Miami 21 project, 3 million square feet of office, the economics don't make sense to do that. And so, part of it is the economics saying, hey, how do I maximize the value of my land holding here? Where can I yield the highest return by using different components? And definitely in a higher density area, you've probably got the ability to generate income from a variety of different uses. You know, can you do something like that in Dadeland or Davie? Probably not. Can you do a lot of single family or multifamily in Davie? Probably. There isn't the demand for office there. There isn't the demand for retail there. Okay? Irene, you had a question or a comment?
It was a comment related to foreigners parking money in the U.S. For residential. Right now, what we have seen over the past 3 or 4 years and more is also used in commercial, but via EB5.
Okay.
There been a lot of foreigners trying to secure the residency or a way to stay here in the U.S., investing in commercial real estate, income producing, via the EB5 program, not expecting much of a return because
right, but again, it's a vehicle for the residency.
Exactly.
And so I don't know if you guys are familiar. The EB5 comes out of a different program that was, I don't know what it's called, but it's an investor program. It's an investor visa program where if you invest a certain amount of dollars in a company and create X amount of jobs, you get a visa. The EB5 is a real estate equivalent, or next generation of that, which is if you provide capital for real estate development or holding, you get the same benefit. And so in places like Venezuela, if you got money and you're trying to find a way to get here, that's a way to do that. So
and in China, because it's very
the Chinese as well. A lot
and
of
now it became a new instrument within your capital stack of financing real estate, because you cannot finance the entire project with EB5 money, but it's just an innovation, a new way to bring some money to the real estate that it won't cost you the same as a loan from a bank or from any other lender. It costs you way